Alright everybody, what's going on? Welcome to another game review, and today we're going to be reviewing a game that has been coming under a lot of fire and a lot of criticism from the gaming media and gamers alike, and that game is Nukem Forever. Now this game's has been bashed for a lot of different reasons, some of them including the game is stuck in the 90s, the gameplay is outdated. On consoles, the graphics are far outdated. The puzzles, the platforming in the game isn't good, and the game just isn't a good game. So first, if we're going to review the game, you need to understand what the game is. Alright, Nukem Forever is the sequel to the popular game in the 90s on PC, Duke Nukem 3D, which was one of the original FPSs in the 90s, which was about, obviously, this guy Duke Nukem, who is basically a giant tool. He runs around and makes, cheesy comments, and basically, objectifies women, and basically it's, the ultimate guy game or whatever. And that was Duke Nukem's personality. Well, this game began development sometime in the mid to late 90s. I don't know the exact year, but that's when it began development, mid to late 90s. And it went through all sorts of problems with different graphic engines, different game studios. Basically, the game was in development for something like 12 to 14 years, roughly. And finally it was released this year in May on PC and PS3 and Xbox 360. And so, obviously, you have to understand that the game is not going to be up to FPSs in 2011. It's just not going to be based on when it was, the creation of the game was started, and where it ended, you knew it was going to be behind. So, let's talk about the game. First of all, the game is absolutely a 90s style FPS. The style of the game is nothing like your modern FPSs, okay? It is very challenging. It's a very hard game, in my opinion, compared to what's out there today. It's got big boss battles that you basically just have to try different techniques and things to beat the boss. There's no real, for most of them anyway, there's no real set way to beat the boss. You just kind of have to run around, use different items and things, and have to keep, honestly, just replaying and replaying and replaying these boss battles until sometimes you discover a pattern because you've played it so many times and you know a way to beat the boss. It's very 90s from that perspective. It does have platforming, and it does have some minor puzzles here and there. Nothing really mind-bending. There was one puzzle I did actually have to look up, and I kind of felt stupid afterwards for having to look it up. But, and I normally don't, cheat like that on games, but it was really bugging me, and I had to look it up. But there is that kind of stuff in the game. There are some variations, like driving scenes. There are parts in the game where you are shrunk, and, in the stages you have to do a lot of platforming as Little Duke, running around and jumping on sofas and things like that. There's one stage at the Duke Burger, which is obviously like a burger joint, and you have to do a lot of platforming with Mini Duke through the kitchen and things like that, off spatulas and things. Yeah, so it's a very 90s oriented game as far as the gameplay is concerned. It's definitely, I never played Duke Nukem 3D because I was like 4 when it was out, but from everything I've heard, it keeps up with the Duke Nukem, whole manly man's game, a game that seems really outdated as far as what it is. There's really no games nowadays that objectify women or really do anything on the edge like that, because with the way activist groups are today and the way people react to things, you can't do anything at all that would possibly be considered misogynistic, possibly considered racist, or any of these things, because people will go nuts. People were going nuts about LA Noire because some of the criminals happened to be black. People got offended at that. So you have to be very careful nowadays with what you do, and this game obviously isn't. It's got a lot of naked babes in it, and a lot of, women are objects in the game, which is definitely an older way of thinking. The humor in the game, again, it is in the 90s. It's cheesy lines that I guess were great back then. The game is sort of funny up until a point, but then the humor and the catchphrases just kind of get old after a while. So yeah, to answer the question, the game is stuck in the 90s. Another big reason it's stuck in the 90s, and this is a difference, because there's a huge difference between the PC version of this game and the console version of this game. Usually there's not a huge difference in those games, but in this game there's a giant difference. On consoles, the graphics are outdated. Now, they're not horrendously bad, okay? I would say they're probably upscale PS2 graphics, okay? When some of the later PS2 games came out, like Killzone 2 and stuff that had, some better graphics, this game was probably up to PS2 graphics or so, or original Xbox. So they're definitely, the graphics are nowhere near what they are today, there's no question about it. So from a console standpoint, it's stuck in the 90s. Now, PC, the graphics, if you have a good gaming PC, you can really up the graphics. Now, all the stuff I talk about for PC is because I watched Darkside Phil play Nukem Forever on his souped up gaming PC. So I witnessed third hand through YouTube the PC version of the game, and the graphics are much, much better. There's no question about it. You can really max out the settings, and then the game looks great. But on consoles, the graphics are definitely suffer. So yeah, overall the game is absolutely in the 90s. It's not like today's shooters. The gameplay, the humor, the graphic, all that stuff. The graphics are better than the 90s, but everything else is pretty much stuck there. And, it is what it is. Now, some people have been saying the game is horrendous. I believe GameSpot gave the game like a 3. It's not that bad by any standpoint, okay? The game is overall pretty fun. There's no sophisticated plot at all. It's basically aliens are invading and you need to kill them. Pretty simple 90s, again, plot before these games really took on these serious kind of novel-like plots that a lot of that games have nowadays to be considered good. And so really no plot or anything to get behind. It's basically running around and blowing crap up. That's pretty much the game. Now, I will say that there are a lot of diversity in settings in this game. You play in a lot of different areas. It's not... People were saying that the areas and settings in this game are not good. I don't agree. I think that there was a really good variation of settings. I thought that some of the settings were really neat. You play, like in Duke's Casino in Vegas. You play outside of Vegas. There's a desert scene, in the Duke Burger, all of these places, in a stadium. There's a lot of good varied gameplay, or varied settings, I think, in the game. So I'm not sure people are coming from saying that there aren't good settings, because I think there are. Now, that being said, there are definitely parts in this game that are extremely frustrating, and a lot of times it's boss fights, a lot of times it is just one part of a level or so that you just can't get past because the design is stupid. And there's an infamous part in the game, it's right near the end where it's an underwater part that everybody's complained about in any game review. DSP complained about it. Pretty much every review I've seen has mentioned this infamous part where you're underwater and you go into a room and there's a bunch of small enemies and it's awful and you die constantly. And I died so many times I actually had to take a break, come back later and try it again before I beat it because I was too frustrated. So there are definitely frustrating parts in the game. There was a big boss fight, which I won't give away, but it took me a lot of times to kill this particular boss, and until I just tried different things and finally got something that worked out. So it's going to be a lot of that in this game. So absolutely, if you're looking for a game that is modernized, that is what you would expect from an FPS in 2011, this isn't going to be the game that you're going to like, okay? If that's all you want. If you want like a Killzone 3 or something like that, that's not what you're going to get. It's a different style. It's very challenging. I think that the thing that kills this game on console, again, over everything else, that's what I played it on Xbox 360, by the way, so that's the game I'm talking about. On consoles, the thing that kills the game is the loading, okay? Now on PC, again, loading is not an issue. Loading is almost instantaneous on PC. On consoles, the loading, and I'm not talking about loading different levels, I'm talking about when you die and have to resume the game. I'm talking anywhere from 30 to 60 seconds of loading. The game literally punishes you for dying with that loading. And just to give you a perspective, I believe my playthrough of the game was 60-something parts, okay? It was like something ridiculous, like 13 hours or so. DSP's playthrough on PC was only 44 parts, and I think that there's two main reasons for that. The first one being, well, there's probably a bunch of reasons, but the first main one being the loading. The loading in the game probably added hours onto my total gameplay because that's how long the loading was. And that's where the big frustrations come is when you're fighting a boss or you're fighting, you're in that room or whatever with the underwater thing and you die a bunch of times. The frustration comes in where every single time you die, you have to sit there for like half a minute to a full minute while the game reloads where you just were. It's not like it's loading new areas, it's loading where you just were. Now, when you die and respawn, the loading is probably around 30 to 45 seconds. When you're loading a brand new level, it could be a minute or over of loading. And that's where the frustration comes in, because you can only die so many times and sit there and watch the loading screen, which honestly plays freaking the Duke Nukem theme song, which by the end of the game I was so tired of hearing because I hear it all the time in the loading screens, and it's just very annoying, the loading. That's what really kills this game. Again, on PC, the loading is not an issue. The loading is instantaneous, and it's not really an issue. So obviously, as you can see, the PC version already is going to be the far better version of this game. If you can get the game on PC, get it, and don't get it on console, get it on PC. Now, a few things about the gameplay itself. Again, it's pretty generic gameplay. You're fighting aliens. It's pretty straightforward. There's not a huge variety in the aliens either. There are some cool guns in the game, so you need guns. But you're basically just going through all these stages, fighting aliens and fighting bosses now and then. And that's pretty much what you do. Now, there are problems with the gameplay though, and the main thing I found on console is the aiming. I found that you can't control your gun half the time where you're aiming. I even turned down the sensitivity on the controls to like 2, and I still couldn't get it. It was extremely imprecise. Now maybe that's just an experience I had, maybe that's an experience other people have had on console, but the aiming was awful and it was imprecise. And that, I think, was another big factor as to why my playthrough was so much longer than Phil's, because I died way more times simply because I couldn't aim, or I had awful controls and couldn't shoot anything, and they would shoot me and die. Whereas he's sitting there with a mouse and keyboard, and his controls are very precise. And so that's a big problem with the game, is absolutely the controls are too sensitive and they don't work very well. And they're, again, besides from the frustrating parts though, the game overall is pretty enjoyable. Some of the puzzles are interesting to solve. Again, they're nothing mind-bending. They're usually platforming puzzles, things like that. And some of the there are variations in gameplay are pretty good. I thought my favorite parts of the game were when you were shrunk and you had to platform or do different things when you're shrunk, because it gives you a whole new perspective. You're using everyday items that you don't think is big. They look like skyscrapers and you have to platform off of them. I thought the Duke Burger level was my favorite level, running through all the condiments and shooting enemies, shrunken enemies and stuff like that. It's pretty interesting. The driving is there's nothing really special about the driving, but there are good variations and I like them to a point. It wasn't all one thing. They did change it up a bit. There are some levels in the game that have absolutely nothing to do with the game. There's another infamous part in the game where it's a level in a strip club where you're basically interacting with things and it has nothing to do with the game, and once you've beaten the level you move on to the rest of the game and you were like, what the hell was the point of me doing that? You can interact with objects throughout the world, such as playing games in an arcade or making popcorn or doing different things that increase your ego, which is basically your life bar. It's a bleeding out life bar, but it's called your ego, and it's increased when you interact with these objects or when you beat boss battles. Your ego is increased, so there's variations there. But overall, the campaign in this good is okay. It's alright. It's definitely a 90s based thing. Definitely not, if you're looking for a modern first person shooter, then don't pick up this game. And if you want the best experience with this game, absolutely get it for PC. Absolutely. If you can't get it for PC, okay, go with console, but PC is definitely the best version of the game. Because the graphics are way better, the loading time is leaps and bounds better, the controls are better, smoother frame rates. There are frame rate problems with the game, just like an older game would have, an older graphics engine. When a lot of stuff is happening, the frame rates go bad, and things like that. Alright, so that's for the campaign. As far as the multiplayer, I played a few matches yesterday. Let me make this short and sweet. The multiplayer on console is balls. Okay? There's nothing revolutionary about it. You got your 4 modes: free for all, team deathmatch, king of the hill, and freaking capture the flag. Okay, they're called different things, but that's your 4 game modes. The interface is awful right from the beginning with the thing. You can either do a custom match where you set the kind of match it is and everything, and you join, and you have to wait for people to search through games and join your lobby, which I can only imagine how long that takes. Or you can do quick match, which basically puts you in any match there is. You don't set specifications. There's no, I want to play team deathmatch and go in. No, it puts you in any mode, on any map, anything like that. Or you can sit there forever in a custom match, or you can go and look through the matches, the custom matches that are made yourself, and pick one. But overall, the interface is awful. You can't just get into a game that you'd like to get into. Then when you actually play the game on console again, it's terrible. The connections are awful. The multiplayer is horridly lagged. There was one match I played where literally I wasn't touching the thumbsticks whatsoever, and my character was moving. Then I would go to aim, I'd hit left trigger, he wouldn't aim. When I released left trigger, then he would aim. I couldn't sprint, the sprinting was delayed action, the deaths were delayed action. Then I just played matches with these people who, I don't know what their problem was, but they were like level 40 something, and just ran around the entire time with freeze rays, and you couldn't hit anything. Again, with the awful, imprecise controls. If you think they're bad on campaign, try it on multiplayer when you're actually trying to hit human targets who are running all over the screen and jumping all over the place, unlike the AI who kind of just stands in one spot. The controls really hinder you in multiplayer, and overall, it's just not good. Again, now on PC, again, frame rate problems on the console with multiplayer as well. On the PC, better graphics, smooth frame rates, probably much better connections, and much less lag on PC, and obviously good controls with the mouse. So multiplayer on PC may actually be decent. As far as, somebody just rang the doorbell, but as far as on console, the multiplayer is awful. And it really doesn't add anything to the game. So bottom line, what do I rate the game? Sorry about that. That's a big firework. It's actually July the 3rd, about 9 o'clock at night, so people are shooting their July 4th fireworks a little early, but yeah, so overall, my final score for Duke Nukem Forever, I'm going to give it a 5.5. It's slightly above average. The game definitely has an attitude of its own, and it's pretty fun overall, but there are definitely frustrating parts to the game. And on console, the game is just stuck in the 90s. Bad, not bad, but outdated graphics. Definitely hardcore grinding gameplay at points. A lot of frustration, frame rate issues, long loading times on console. And the multiplayer on console really isn't good at all and doesn't really add anything to the experience. So, final score for Duke Nukem Forever, a 5.5. Certainly not horrendous. Worth a rental, I think, if anything. It's not a 3. It's better than a 3, but it's a 5.5. Nothing's really broken about the game. It's just got some issues. So, alright. That's my review of Duke Nukem Forever. I hope you found it useful to you. Definitely a game worth renting if you want to play something more old school and just want to see what it's all about. Alright? So that's it. Thank you for watching, and I will see you next time with more game reviews.